Welcome to Six Count. I'm your host, Zara Wild, bringing you the voices and stories of jazz from Durham, North Carolina. Brandon, thank you so much for joining Six Count.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you driving out from Raleigh this evening. But first, just congratulations, you got married this past fall.
I did get married this past fall on the 21st night of September. If anyone's familiar with the Earth, Wind & Fire song.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, it was an amazing time. We got married up in Virginia in the DC area. It's about 400 people at the wedding or so.
Wow.
So super big event. We went to Italy for a little while afterwards.
Wow.
So I really have just been kind of living the dream these past few months.
Where in Italy did you go?
We went all over. We went to Amalfi Coast, Milan, Florence, Rome, Lake Como as well.
I don't think there's anywhere more beautiful than the Amalfi Coast.
It's literally not.
Yeah. And I saw in some of your recent work that you had photos of the Duomo, I think, too. So you've been to Italy a few times, it seems like.
Yeah. So when I first graduated from undergrad, when I was in undergrad, I got the opportunity to study abroad over in Italy, working on the Italian and jazz studies program.
Oh, nice.
So I was able to kind of get connected with some people over there, and we did some traveling back and forth for a few years with the band I was playing with at the time. So Certainly no stranger to Italy.
Was this where the Jazzit Festival and Teatro Piccolo in Milan and Notte Bianca performance in front of the Duomo was all part of that?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it kind of spanned over a few different summers. I want to say maybe 4 or 5 summers consecutively that we went back over there. But yes, all of these experiences did kind of come from then.
Very cool. Well, it's been a big fall for you because also in November, Lakewood Jump came out with Keenan McKenzie and The Riffers, of which you're a part. So just share a little bit about the reception that you've received since launching and just how it feels to see it finally come out.
Yeah, for sure. The recording process for me is always interesting because, you do it, you get in the studio, you work really hard to get the takes, and then you kind of almost forget about it in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when it's not your project and your work. So to kind of hear the finished products of everything really almost reminded me of the studio session in itself. And I was just super happy and super proud to hear how the cuts turned out.
Yeah. And I saw from Keenan that each of the 14 tracks was a single unedited take. How unusual is that? It sounds like that's not usually the case.
It's not usually the case, although I think a lot of musicians would agree that first thought a lot of times is best thought. And so even throughout history, we've seen jazz artists, people like Miles Davis, who tend to just say, okay, we're just going to do this one time, one take, and it is what it is. And I do truly think that a lot of times it's your best thoughts and the actions that you're going to actually play over a tune, it's going to come out in that first time. By the time you get to number 3, you're just playing a mental game with yourself a lot of times.
Yeah. And I know you've played with the Riffers frequently, so you're very comfortable in the swing historic jazz, but I've also seen you all over the place doing all kinds of work and not even getting to the pieces that you put together. How do you typically present your music and how do you describe it? I saw that you share in your bio that it's conversational, so I wanted to ask what you mean by that as well.
Yeah, so it's almost trying to always make sure that, because, music is a language at the end of the day. So always trying to figure out how to communicate with the listener and how we can evoke emotions out of the music. And so that may be different for every track because, of course, every human has different emotions, right? Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're excited, we want to get up and dance, right? But just trying to always figure out how to make sure that the music is kind of talking towards those emotions of the listener.
Well, I'd love to talk about your recent singles from 2024. First up, Promise is a Comfort to a Fool, and you also have Little Sunflower. So share about the intent behind those, and are they connected or disparate thoughts?
So I guess you could say they're kind of separate thoughts. With Little Sunflower, one of the things that I wanted to do was start to record more existing music in the world. My first two projects were all original tunes, which was super cool to do, of course, but there's so many good songs in the world, you know, and a lot of the songs are tunes that we tend to play live on gigs and stuff anyway. So Little Sunflower is one of these first arranged tunes that we ended up playing live all the time. It kind of just ended up becoming that arrangement of it naturally. So we definitely wanted to make sure to get that on record and record it. As for Promise is a Comfort to a Fool, that one is a little bit more interesting. The title itself comes from basically a saying that my mother used to tell me.
Okay.
Which is a promise is a comfort to a fool.
Like, Mom, do you promise to take us to Disney kind of thing?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So I learned at a very quick age to not, always just believe people at face value, right? And just to believe the promise just because they put it out there, but you really have to prove something, with actions and with intent as well. So that tune was a little bit more of homage to my mother and a lot of the wise sayings that we get from her.
But you did make an important promise in September.
It was funnily enough about that. My wife actually alluded to that in her vows. So, I know that you don't do promises. However,
this one matters.
Yeah, exactly. That one, I promise.
Well, you mentioned DC earlier, and you also have some roots in the Washington, DC area. And so what were you doing there and what brought you to the Triangle?
Yeah, so I am originally from Washington, D.C. I grew up in Peachey County, Maryland, which is just 1-2 towns over or so. So I was there until I was 18 years old. So spent all of my childhood there. And then I came to North Carolina for college. So I did my undergrad studies at Elon University. Was over there for 4 years. Of course, studying music, of course, percussion performance. And then I came up to North Carolina Central for that master's degree, specifically with jazz performance. And then I never moved back home after, so moved to Raleigh and then just been on the scene, just been trying to, find our way.
And you're also an educator. So can you share about your teaching engagements at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. So I did do a little bit of teaching at my alma mater, Elon, for about a year or so. But currently right now I'm teaching at Wake Tech, have a few classes up there, mostly music classes. And then I do a lot of private teaching as well, too. So at the moment, probably somewhere between 30, 35 weekly students.
That's a lot. That feels like a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I have amazing students, though, so it definitely doesn't feel as stressful as it may for certain teachers. But I do teach drums. I teach piano. I teach, of course, vibes and other percussion instruments as well, too. So, yeah, always trying to, the education is an important part to it. And whether it's a formal education or informal education, it's this idea that everyone can always learn something. And I've been so blessed with the knowledge and skills in this that might as well relay it to somebody.
There's aptitude of what you're naturally more good at or more interested in. But how did you choose on vibes versus the piano or drums? Yeah,
that's a good question, actually. I still feel like I'm kind of going through the process of choosing. But it was one of those things, especially when I did get to North Carolina Central, I just kind of said, I'll let it choose for me.
Let it give a little space to see what hits?
Yeah. Kind of still try to make sure to nurture both, to keep active in both. But, naturally life is going to kind of pull you one way or another. So what I noticed, particularly in this area, because there's a lot of killing drummers, there's a lot of great drummers around here.
Larry and Bean,
oh my
Scott,
gosh, yeah, Donovan,
Patrick,
Dorian. Like the list is so long. But there's not like the list isn't as long with like vibraphone players.
Isn't it like 4 or 5?
Yeah,
if that, I think.
it's only a handful of us really.
Yeah.
So I think just because of that, people naturally just kind of put me into the whole vibraphone group, which was totally fine for me for sure. And I just kind of learned to love it as you go.
Yeah.
Drums was my first instrument. So it's a little bit more natural. We talk about communication, right? I feel like I do communicate a little bit better on the drums. But the vibraphone studies have been something going strong since Elon days. Shout out to my mentor, Jon Metzger.
Yeah.
He's the one who's really, really kind of taught me the ropes with it. So just been trying to nurture that, and it's been all good things ever since.
I feel like the vibe sounds like a more cheerful instrument, but then when I was looking at your discography, I noticed that a lot of the songs do feel more somber or are just running more of the spectrum of emotions than just being like cheerful swing music or something.
Right.
But is there a mood that you tend to inhabit when playing the vibes and in choosing the songs that you want to record?
Not particularly. I think once again, it's just the idea of like trying to evoke these emotions and really trying to hit the spectrum essentially. So yes, it is a happy instrument, timbre wise for the most part, but the instrument is always just going to be the vehicle of expression for the actual composer themselves, So I'm always just trying to think outside of that. I mean, for the most part, even when I compose, I typically don't compose from the vibraphone. I'm composing from the piano.
Okay.
And then kind of like transferring it over into a certain sense. So never really thinking too much about just the specific sound of that instrument itself, but what is the whole sound going to sound like completely with the full band or, with the instrumentation that I'm looking for.
Okay. And where are you getting inspiration for that sound right now?
Right now, I would say I've really been digging into a lot of the roots. So I'm first generation American. My mother's from Jamaica. My father's from Grenada. So growing
in Spain?
In the Caribbean.
Oh, okay.
Actually, yeah. So if you know where Trinidad and Tobago is, it's super south, like very close to South America. Grenada is like right above it.
Okay.
Really small island for sure. But yeah, so kind of always had that like reggae background, always listened to a lot of soca music, dance hall music. So just, figuring out how to continue to incorporate some of those styles and some of those elements kind of back into the jazz music that we tend to record and play. Yeah. And of course, there are, artists that have kind of been down this road, people like Monty Alexander before, but once again, with the personal sound of Brandon Mitchell and, trying to really work it out for my band. Yeah. Just trying to continue to push it and see how far it can go. So there's those influences, but I also did marry into an African family this past September too. And so just to see how like culturally rich a lot of their family is and a lot of the music and food and just all the great things that come out of Africa as well too. So been trying to channel into that a little bit more, listening to more people, Bunny Mac, Fela Kuti, and then of course all of the current artists with the Afrobeat movement as well too.
Yeah, that sounds like such an interesting blend, but really interesting. So I hope that we can get a taste of that. Is there anything you'd want to speak to about what's coming up in 2025 for you? Yeah,
for sure. So I am planning on releasing another project for sure.
That's great.
Yeah, I won't give too many details as it's still kind of going through the pipeline, but we have some music recorded. It is going to be with the 4-piece. So pretty much the same lineup from some of the previous albums, give or take.
And can you share that lineup for anyone unfamiliar?
Yeah. So this time around, we got, of course, me, Chris Mills will be on bass. Brandon Shamar will be on piano. And then on these particular recordings, Chuck Pickney is on drums.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Do play with Dorian Dotson a lot, but
he was cruising.
Yeah,
He's on that cruise.
Superstars going to be superstars. So.
Well, that's great. And you said no details. Is that the extent to which you want to share? Any other hints you can give?
Just be on the lookout for the album On Brand.
Okay.
I'll leave
very
it at
great. And when you were sharing about the kind of sound that you're looking for, and this is a bit of an abstract question, but how would you say, what is the sound that you are chasing right now? And how do you share that with a band as you're creating? Like, what are some things that help you define it in ways that your band can understand?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the challenges, especially as a jazz musician, is there's such a heavy disconnect between what we think of as like the tradition and then what people tend to hear today. Right. So it's like, how do we continue to bridge that gap so that we can all, even as just common listeners, really see the lineage that traveled from, I don't know, people like Robert Glasper or, any of these modern day artists, and to see where those influences came from. So trying to cover that spectrum and really trying to make sure that this is accessible music that anybody can listen to, right? Not just necessarily the jazz aficionados or the highbrows or anything, but, just generally good music that people can vibe to.
It seems like being accessible to, we'll say, the everyday listener, if that exists, or to the audiences that you reach at your shows. They might not be always at the Sharp 9 or Missy Lane's for jazz, but they are there to appreciate good music. That feels a bit like a through line in how you want your music to be understood. Is that a good characterization of what you're trying to do?
Definitely. I think so. I mean, I feel like even just thinking about, a lot of people within like the Black community, aside from jazz musicians and students of music, right? There's a lot of my people who don't listen to this, right? Who don't really understand or who don't even give it necessarily a chance, right? But if it's coming from an artist who they know or someone who has a personal relationship with, now they're going to at least give it a chance. Now they're going to perceive the music a little bit differently. And I've come across this experience so many times where people will come to a live show. A lot of times it's live, and they'll be like, I've never seen a show like this before.
Yeah.
Like, this is a crazy experience. I want to see this again. I want to do it again. And so that's, we want to make sure that these listeners are getting excited and get them out, get them to support live music at concerts, but also, stream the records, buy the records, and, support the arts. Yeah.
What's your take on the audiences in the Triangle and the appetite for jazz? Because sometimes it feels like we are an incredibly vibrant community. And then other times I'm reminded that jazz sometimes still is in this niche place in music.
Yeah, I agree. I think this area can be kind of a little weird sometimes. Well, not weird, but maybe flip-flop-ish on it.
Flip-flop-ish.
One thing I will say, though, and, feel free to agree or disagree with me, but it seems like we don't get a lot of the major artists that come through the Raleigh-Durham area. Similar to how they would go through like possibly Charlotte or something like that, right?
Across the board or jazz in particular?
Across the board. I would say across the board, right? But especially with like jazz music. So, we've been super fortunate to have places like Missy Lane's pop up.
Yes.
And once again, to establish that community and give those jazz musicians and some of these Black musicians a place to actually go and play. But I just kind of think it starts there. Like getting, it probably starts with the audience.
Yeah.
Right. And having the actual pull or the crowd to convince the artist to want to actually come into that area, But yeah. I've also experienced the same thing. Sometimes it seems like it's such a super strong and thriving art scene. And I would say Durham is different. Durham is.
Yeah.
Like it's
Durham's
always kind of like that for sure. But some of these other areas, and I live in Raleigh, so I can speak for Raleigh for sure. And even Chapel Hill as well. Flip-flop-ish.
Yeah.
is the word.
Well, sometimes I wonder if the kind of gig where people are still able to talk loudly and not really paying attention to the musicians, if that's a good thing, because not that there can always only be listening rooms, but I sometimes feel like it is a disservice to the musicians to be providing like ambient sound when it is something that I think deserves undivided attention at times.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's time and place for everything, you know. Still a trade at the end of the day. We are still tradesmen. So when you have a job to do, you know, you're going to go do the job. And it makes sense, right? There may be a fancy event or a party or something, and it's really just to kind of set the ambiance for it. But then there's other moments when, you know, a band goes to play at a venue or a bar or something, and it's like they're supposed to be the draw or kind of like the main act going on, but they're not necessarily treated like that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it just kind of starts from how society in our country tends to like look at artists in that sense. So just to give you an example, I was just over in Europe for a little while and got the opportunity to just kind of go to a few shows and jam sessions and stuff like that.
Where in Europe?
Over in Italy.
Oh, okay. Back to Italy. For the honeymoon.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So even being over there and like, I just went to a jam session. So, you know, it's a bar, right? They got a little stage and everything. But if you compare that scene to, I don't know, the scene that you'll see here in Raleigh, North Carolina or something, every single face was looking at the stage, right? Even if they're talking to each other, right? But you could tell it's more so interacting about what's happening on the stage, right? So it's just like that attentiveness to the arts and just the appreciation for the arts. It's a little bit different, and I hope that we can keep doing our part as artists, keep bringing that appreciation back over here to the country as well.
Yeah, Europe has an interesting history of appreciating jazz music and being a haven during the civil rights movement, or before then, of course, too, as a place where people could appreciate good music and where Black musicians could not be part of the, I guess, race wars that were happening too.
Yeah. I mean, to get treated almost like superstars. No matter, I mean, as you know, you could be a no-name, right? But to go over there and still to play that music, like they're going to have the utmost appreciation for it. It hits very differently. And you definitely, as the artist, you know, it's a different type of appreciation that really makes us feel, I guess you can say, more valued, honestly.
Do you think part of it is the phones itself, like where people are just stuck to their phones and aren't thinking, there's someone who is playing their craft, we should pay attention?
Maybe. I think the phones play a part with everything. And just kind of social media in general, right? So, for example, instead of taking the moment in and truly watching and appreciating what's going on stage, you know, you're probably more focused on getting it for your story, right? Or finding like the perfect little comment or something to put underneath of it. Now you done missed like 20 minutes of the concert.
Right.
So I do think I think it definitely plays a part, but maybe not the end all be all, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned, to go back to your 4-piece, has that always been the case where that feels like the most comfortable like arrangement for the music, or have you've done the big bands too, of course, with Keenan stuff. But can you share about just how you decided that works best for you? Yeah.
So we still, even nowadays, still playing a lot of different settings. So like you said, in the big band setting, we'll do duo stuff, trio stuff. I played with a septet not too long ago. So still kind of all over the board for sure. But I think a lot of it comes down to finding the correct people in order to fit the sound that I have in my head. Part of that, and a big part of that for me, is making sure that I have another harmony player. So, of course, the vibraphone, you can play harmonies on it. And I do a lot of 4-mallet stuff. So it can be treated as a chordal instrument. But for me, the beauty of the 4-piece is having the freedom to not really worry about that as much, right? To kind of have that support coming from the rest of the band, so I can really, try to explore on a melodic basis instead of having to, okay, and I'm playing melodies. Okay, and I'm trying to play the chords. And, it's a lot of work to fill it in compared to it kind of coming across naturally. So I just find in the 4-piece, a lot of these tunes that we tend to play, like it feels just very natural.
And what would you say it takes to become a good band leader? Because it might not be the role for everyone, or it's something that you build towards, but is that something that you knew you always wanted to do and kind of fell naturally?
I think so. I think it kind of started back at some of the Elon days, and really just as the person who always was like spurring the ideas or like leading the pack, to be like, yeah, let's go into the practice room and work on this song together, So I think even just kind of starting there from a mental standpoint to want to take that next step of proactivity, whatever that is, right? And so let's learn this new tune, or let's try to get into a new venue to play into, this, that, and the third. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been doing it for a while now, and I've learned a lot about trying to lead groups. And of course, I'm not perfect at it, but a few things that I think are important is preparation. So always trying to be as prepared as possible and trying to give the group as much information as necessary to make their jobs easier, right? If they feel like they're overworking, you're probably not doing a good job as a band leader.
Okay.
Right. So I think preparation is definitely going to be an important part. I think patience is probably a very important and overlooked aspect as well, too.
Patience for what exactly?
Patience for people.
Okay.
Patience for processes. Like, human beings are human beings. And sometimes human beings are going to be late. Sometimes human beings are going to be in a crappy mood or something. Sometimes their brains just aren't going to be fully wired, right? And that goes for you, that goes for me, that goes for every human, essentially. But, you still have to have a little bit of grace and a little bit of empathy when approaching these situations.
Yeah.
It's a fine line, because we still got a job to do at the same time. So I think exercising that patience is a super important aspect of it as well. And
you mentioned that you've known you wanted to do music for a while. Have you ever been tempted from, I don't know, industry or otherwise, to do something else, to ever leave music or do something on the side? Or is focusing on music been kind of an intentional decision that you've wanted to maximize?
It's definitely been an intentional decision. I was talking about this a little earlier in the year, actually. And it was either sophomore or junior year of undergrad.
Okay.
Where I basically told myself, it was junior year, I basically told myself, my goal is to make a living off of music. Like, only music related income and activities I want to spur my life. And I was able to do that, and I'm still currently doing that for about like the past 10 years or so.
That's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I don't even really like my question, because I feel like embedded in there is this like, well, how are you actually doing music? But we know that jazz is not always like the most lucrative, straightforward pathway for a lot of people. So I think it is admirable how you have decided to commit to it.
It's tough. And there's definitely times where it got rough, for sure. But, I could probably go get an IT job, make a lot of money, but then you'd
be doing IT.
You know what I mean? And I don't got no problem with all the IT folks out there, for sure.
I just interviewed Thomas, who's in IT. I just don't have any mind for IT. I'm no good at it.
and more importantly, I think, is no passion for it, right? And it's that lack of passion that's going to make you dread life. Like, that's what makes you not want to get up, not want to go to work every day. But everything that I'm able to do, it's like, it's still a job, of course. But I love seeing, people bob their heads and they're applauding when you're up on the stage. Or I love seeing, case in point, last week, one of my students who I've been teaching since she was like 3.5 years old or something, she played in a recital as a 9-year-old.
Oh.
Her mother sent me the picture from our very, very first lesson. So to see that happen, it's like, that's the passion for it that I wouldn't trade for the world.
Yeah. And I think there's so many, of course, cliches about passion that you just have to follow it or find it, but that can be hard to do. And not every day do you wake up where you're filled with passion. So it also is this balance of I have to have discipline that then can fuel passion. And those two are constantly interacting, it seems.
And patience comes back once again, too, especially in a craft like this. Even if you think about the one-hit wonders on the popular side of music, or, the people who just blew up, like, they did not just blow up, right? They've been doing this for the past 10, 15 years. They just happen to come into the public eye now.
Yeah.
So I think the impatience is definitely an important part to it. Everybody's situation is different, right? Especially if you think from a financial standpoint. I mean, if you have mouths to feed, if you have a family to feed, you may not always have that patience, that you want to have, right? But I was blessed just to commit from a young age, right? And to really say, this is what I'm going to do, and be stubborn enough to kind of do it to the point, where it's working out currently.
Yeah. How far in the future do you think in terms of your own career trajectory, and how are you thinking about your goals at the moment as a musician and as a teacher?
Yeah, it's hard. It's kind of similar to, I've always had this thing in life. There's like a dilemma that always comes between two things, right? And it's like how to choose between those two things. So growing up as a kid, for me, it was always sports. Because I love basketball. It's my favorite sport, one of my favorite things in the world. But I was always a really good football player.
Okay.
Right. So it's always like, oh, well, you got to do the whole pros and cons thing. Right. So then fast forward into college and graduate school. Okay. We got the drum set. Okay. We got the vibraphone. Like, which way are you going to go? So even now at this current juncture in my life, I feel like it's something similar where you have the performing and the artistry aspect of it, but you also do have the teaching side as well, too. Similar to in the past, I'm kind of letting life just kind of lead me as is, being proactive in both fields, but, just following, going with the flow in a sense. So I don't know. I think it's my long-winded way of saying,
I mean, I don't have a 10-year plan myself.
But I guess the one thing I know is I still want it to be music related. Right. So whether that is still teaching or, maybe opening up a studio or something of my own.
Okay.
Or if it is really diving, into the performance aspect and trying to start to, tour a little more, get around the country a little more.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of open right now.
Go back to Italy, maybe.
Yeah. Definitely.
I like how I seem to hear you saying that you are chugging along working on your craft, but this openness to opportunity or having like the instruments choose for you, you were clearly working hard, but wanted to be receptive to like where I guess the universe would be guiding you in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've learned in life when you try to force things, that's usually when it goes downhill pretty quickly. So once again, I just try to always exercise being a patient person and saying it's okay if I don't have the answers today. Yeah. Just keep working towards it. The answer's going to come.
Okay. And you've been at this for more than a decade. What would you tell yourself 10 years ago, or to someone who might be coming to the Triangle like you did from DC or elsewhere, of how to kind of get into the scene and find your place and all of that? Yeah,
there's a few things, but I think the most important thing would just be consistency is key. And just be consistent with whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of times I think people are too quick to give up or to quit. And this was something that I learned from my mentor, Jon, when he told me, he said, anytime you move or you go into a new scene, he always said it's going to be 1 year. It's going to take at least 1 year before you really start to feel like, okay, the phone is ringing. I'm starting to get connected with people. So I think it's just, you got to just have that patience.
Yeah, that's, I think, a nice way to take the pressure off, because you're kind of saying don't even have self-doubt until it's been a year, because up until then, you're just doing the needed work.
So if you just stay consistent through that time, I mean, of course, you probably don't want to be doing it for 10 years and not see any progress, right? But usually, these things compound over time, right? Yeah. So if you're really trying to become a better player, if you're practicing daily, if you're going to sessions, if you're going to check out other people, if you're listening to music, right? All of these things are just going to compound, but you have to do it consistently and just, be patient with it and trust the process.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on the show. Is there anything else you'd want to share with Six Count listeners?
No, I think we're about good to go. I guess the last thing that I would say is just for people to just get to know me a little bit better. I'm just so big on like family and culture and just everything of that nature. So like just traveling, just don't be surprised to see me pop up anywhere in the world.
Where's next for you?
Yeah, hopefully. Well, my niece is actually supposed to graduate from high school I guess in May or so.
Oh, congratulations to her.
Yeah, shout out to her for sure. So she's talking about wanting to go to Greece for her graduation trip.
What a great
That should be pretty cool. Definitely. And then on a more professional front, I should be going to Texas A&M in February to be a lecturer at one of their universities out there.
Oh, great. Will that be a semester residency kind of thing? Or?
No, just for a few days, more so like for their jazz festival that they'll have out there. So like I said, always trying to get around. Don't be surprised if you see me around in different places. And we'll just keep the music moving.
What's something that is never on your bio, but that tells a lot about you?
Something that's not on my bio, but that tells a lot about me. I'm a pretty, a lot of people don't know this actually. So I'm a pretty big financial geek in the making.
Okay. Like personal finance or stocks and all that?
Yeah, the whole nine.
Okay.
So most people wouldn't guess that, just especially from like artists and musicians and stuff. But specifically from the pandemic, when that time hit, I got really deep into it because, I really thought about it. And I was like, musicians have to retire too.
Yes.
So that is something that even to this day, I'm still like pretty heavily interested in and always kind of looking for friends and like-minded people to be able to talk about that stuff with. So if there's anybody listening who kind of lives in that field, hit me up.
I wonder what it would look like if you did invest a little bit of every single performance, I'm sure. I mean, that is how you invest essentially.
Definitely. I mean, my very first time, and I won't go down a rabbit hole, but it all started with my mother just being like, open up a Roth, like open it up. I was like, I don't know what that is, but okay. So I just opened it up and I still play in church every Sunday. I actually play drums in church.
Which church?
St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Raleigh,
I bet it's Carolina. A gorgeous building.
Oh,
High church.
Yeah, it is. And great musicians there as well, too. But pretty much from when I first moved to Raleigh, I would always just take a chunk of one of those church checks and put it in. And once again, when you do these small things consistently, like you really start to see the fruits of the labor pay off.
Yeah. An important lesson for all musicians of really all ages, because it's never too late, although it's better to be earlier.
Hey, well, if there's one thing we know about creatives is we could be pretty bad on the business and financial side. So the better that we can all get collectively with that, I think it's the stronger we're just going to make this field in general.
Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity there for more financial mentorship with musicians in the area.
Definitely.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zahra, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Six Count. I'm Zara Wild. You can let us know what you thought of the episode or recommend a guest by emailing us at sixcountpodcast@gmail.com or by finding us on Twitter or Instagram at sixcountpodcast. If you'd like to support our work in telling the story of jazz in Durham, you can make a gift to the show by following the link in our episode description. Thanks for listening.